Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back in another video today, and today we're going to be talking about the Dallas Mavericks potentially trading for Jrue Holiday. It's been reported that the Dallas Mavericks have interest in trading for Jrue Holiday, also have interest in trading for Lonzo Ball, or potentially signing Chris Paul. As the Mavs are looking for a point guard to bring in, with them having Kyrie out at least the first 2.5 months of the season, could be 2 months. NBA season starts around end of October. Kyrie's expected to be back mid-January. Now, look, here's what I'll say is if you add in a Jrue Holiday at point guard, and I think this is the great thing about the whole thing about adding in a point guard to start the season if you're Dallas, like they're interested to do. If you trade for Jrue Holiday or you sign Chris Paul, I don't know about the same thing for I don't know if I'd say the same thing for Lonzo, but I'll say this for Chris Paul and Jrue Holiday. If you bring in a Chris Paul or Jrue Holiday, and Kyrie's initial maybe his initial return is where he wants to come back. Where he wants to come back might be his initial return might be mid-January, but maybe he can take some time, and if it's better for him to return end of January, maybe beginning of February, where he'll be more ready to go and more rested for the postseason is what I was thinking. But if you have Jrue Holiday or Chris Paul starting at point guard, if they were to trade for either one of the or trade for Jrue Holiday, you wouldn't have to trade for Chris Paul. You'd sign Chris Paul. I think that could buy Kyrie some extra time. It might not be necessary for you to come back mid-January. You could be able to wait to end of January or beginning of February. If your rehab needs to take a couple, if you want to take a couple extra weeks, maybe that is something Kyrie could look into. If you have a 6-time all defensive guy and 2-time all-star and 2-time NBA champion like Jrue Holiday at starting point guard for the first 2.5-3 months for the season, but the talk begins of what does the trade look like, because you're gonna have to give up some good assets to get Jrue Holiday. You're gonna have him for 3 seasons, and that's the difficult thing I think you look at in this deal for Dallas is that you're bringing in Jrue Holiday for 3 seasons. This is a guy that is not going to be a starter full time. I mean, he's going to come off. You would think he's going to come off the bench right after you bring him in, and that's why I say bring in Chris Paul. Chris Paul, you don't have to give up anything to get him. You've got to sign him. He's probably, I would say, Holiday's 3 times the money Chris Paul is, if not more than that. Because Chris Paul, his contract, it's going to be maybe around $7-10 million to get him on a 1-year deal, right? I mean, he's a great player, but it's not going to, at the most, it's going to be $10 million to get Chris Paul on a 1-year contract. Maybe it might be $8 or $9 million that the Mavs can get Chris Paul on a 1-year deal. Meanwhile, Jrue Holiday's making $30 million the next 3 seasons. You have to give up assets to give him in the deal. I'm not saying Chris Paul is better than Jrue Holiday. I'm not saying that I'd rather have Chris Paul than Jrue Holiday. But I think that money-wise and what you're giving up, it might be smarter to have Chris Paul, because here's another thing. Jrue Holiday hasn't come off the bench, at a consistent level since the 2015-16 season. I mean, he started every game for the Boston Celtics in the last 2 seasons. He played 193 games for the Milwaukee Bucks over the course of 4 seasons, and he only came off the bench in 8 of his 193 games there. His last couple seasons of New Orleans, he didn't come off the bench. The last time he came off the bench consistently was the 2015-16 season with New Orleans. He played 67 games and started in 25. Meanwhile, Chris Paul, just a couple seasons ago, and I know Chris Paul, most of his career, he's been a starter, but just a couple seasons ago, just a season ago, in the 2023-24 season, Chris Paul came off the bench in 41 of his 59 games for the Golden State Warriors, and he had that experience of coming off the bench and starting when their star point guard is out. Stephen Curry missed some time. He started in 18 games. Rarely did you see Chris Paul in the same starting lineup as Rarely did you see Chris Paul in the same starting lineup as Stephen Curry, and that's what it would be with Kyrie. And I think Dallas, if Jrue Holiday plays well and he's a great asset to this team, you maybe start to think about if this is a guy we want to stay in the starting lineup as the shooting guard, because Holiday can play at the shooting guard, and then maybe you explore putting Klay Thompson on the bench if Chris Paul's on the team, and you don't have to give up all these assets to get Chris Paul like you do Jrue Holiday. Chris Paul just goes right to the bench. And I think he's such a great the other thing I'll add is he's such a great facilitator to play next to Cooper Flag and Anthony Davis and Klay Thompson. This is a great team for Chris Paul to be on with the shooters and the playmakers that he's on the same team with. And once Kyrie comes back, I don't know if Chris Paul will ever be on the floor with Kyrie, but that's another great shooter that Chris Paul can get the ball to. I mean, Chris Paul is such a good facilitator. This is such a great team for him to be on, in my opinion. I'd love to see it. And here's another thing I will say. I know this. Chris Paul's a Dallas Cowboys fan, and I don't know how much that plays in, but I know he likes the area of Dallas. So I wouldn't be that surprised if Chris Paul would want to go to the Cowboys. I remember in a documentary I watched, it was like a 30 for 30. I remember him going into a Cowboys game and him saying he was a Cowboys fan. I don't know if this was like 2017, 2018. I don't know if he still likes the Cowboys, but that is just one thing I'll throw out there. So I think he'd want to go there. And with how good of a facilitator he is, it is a great place for him to be. If Gafford's still in Dallas and PJ Washington is still in Dallas, you've got the big men that they've got that Chris Paul would get the basketball to, and Gafford, if he's still in Dallas with Lively and Davis and Cooper Flag and PJ Washington, it's a great team for him to be on. But you look at what it would cost you for Jrue Holiday. I think you're looking at a 3-team deal between the Dallas Mavericks, Boston Celtics, and Brooklyn Nets. The Celtics and Mavs need a third team to get involved in the deal. The Celtics would receive Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. The Mavs would receive Jrue Holiday in the 28th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft, so a late first. And then the Nets would receive Dwight Powell. And then, because the Mavs would have to give up some extra salary, I don't think the Celtics would want Dwight Powell, who actually he played for the Celtics a long time ago. And then a 2030 second-round pick from Dallas that belongs to Philadelphia that I believe was involved in that Caleb Martin, Quentin Grimes deal. So, yeah, I think that'd be the deal to get it. So if you're Dallas, you've got to give up Powell, Gafford, Washington, and a second-round pick in 2030, which could be a valuable pick to get Holiday, who has a dicey contract, and a late first-round pick in this year's draft. Holiday's a great player. He'd be a great addition. This year, he averaged in 62 games, 30 minutes per game, averaged 11 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 4 assists per game, and is amazing defensively to the point where he's a 6-time all-defensive. He's been on the 6-time all-defensive team, and also was Defensive Player of the Year candidate last year, sixth in voting. So he's a great player, but Holiday is better than Chris Paul. But the fact that you look at the contract comparison and the fact that you have to give up what you have to give up for Holiday and Chris Paul, you just sign him. And with how good of a facilitator Chris Paul is, great 3-point shooter. If you ask me to pick between Chris Paul and Jrue Holiday, I'm going with Chris Paul. I think it's a different story if you have to trade for Chris Paul, but the fact that all you've got to do is sign him, bring him on, I think he'd be on board. I think that has to be the number one option for this Mavs team. We'll see what happens, though. And for Paul, he's staying in the area. He was in San Antonio last year, so he doesn't have to move very far. He stays in the same state. So, and for Paul, if he does go to the Mavs, that's another thing that I'll add to this, is that with that, he'll play for all Texas teams, Rockets, Mavs, and Spurs if he joins the Mavs. But I think Holiday would be a good addition, but you've got to give up a lot more. You've got to take on that contract. He's in his 30s now. That's a 3-year deal. I think it's less expensive, and you don't have to give up as much if you just go get Chris Paul. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and peace out.